listen to this. Now listen to this. One sounds like a computer programmed it, and the other sounds like someone actually played it. The difference comes down to three things: accent, placement, and conversation. By the end of this tutorial, you're going to hear exactly what changes and why. But before we get into that, my name is Miles, and if you're serious about leveling up your music production and joining a community of like-minded producers, our production membership was built for exactly that. If you're interested in finding out more, the link will be in the description below. So point one is going to be accent. What you have to understand is real drummers don't hit everything equally the same. What I mean by that is everything is going to have a varied velocity. Having every note at 100% velocity is the most obvious sign your drums were programmed rather than played. The most important thing to understand here is having dynamics in your drums is what creates the rhythm. Okay, so just to show you here in Ableton Live, we have our drums here, as well as a texture loop just to glue the drums together a little bit. And it sounds a little bit like this. So you might think that sounds really good so far, but we can make this a lot better. Right now it's sounding a little bit rudimentary. So just so you can hear it a little bit better, I'm just going to solo the drums. So we can clearly see here that there's no variation in the velocity. Every note is hitting the same, creating this robotic feel. It sounds a little bit too electronic, and we're trying to bring in some of that human element when we're writing and programming our drums. Now, if I go into what variation in our velocity actually sounds like, it'll sound a little bit like this. So not only does that sound a little bit less boring, it's actually made things a bit more interesting. And just to show you how I varied the velocity here, we can see that straight away our hats have a variation in the velocity, as well as our rim, some of our claps, our snare. However, with our kick, we want to maintain the same velocity throughout the track. That is if the kick is hitting on the downbeat, like this one here. So you want to maintain consistent velocity for certain elements like your kick. However, you can have a variation in your velocity with other elements like your closed hat, your snare, your clap by a little bit, and your rim shots. And just to show you a little bit closer of the range of velocity that I've applied here, everything seems to be hitting between around 75 to about 100. Whereas having everything the same before just sounded really stale and rudimentary. Whereas if you program your drums to have some velocity variances like this, it's honestly going to sound so much better. And it's the little things that add up to the bigger picture. So just to play that one more time so you have a better understanding of the velocity. Point number two is going to be placement. So the same principle from point one also exists in point two. Real drummers won't hit everything equally as hard, nor will they play everything exactly the same time. And having everything on the grid is what's going to make it sound too robotic. And to show you how I've done that, I'm going to open this clip. So not only have I removed some of the hat notes here to just let the loop breathe a bit more, I've also shifted the notes, as well as the note length. And that's what this sounds like. We can see here that we have a variation in the note lengths. This one's shorter than this one, and so forth. Having your notes start at a different time and having the note lengths vary as well are big contributors to sounding a bit more human. I've also done that with the snare, the rim shot, and the clap. So when it comes to your clap, there's a technique called pushing and pulling the backbeat. So your clap is what's known as the backbeat. It's hitting on the 2 and the 4, which is known as the backbeat. So what I mean by pulling the backbeat is normally your clap sits here perfectly on the grid, but if you shift it backwards in time, like so, This is something called pulling the backbeat. What this is going to do is it's going to have a bit more of a laid back feel compared to if I push it forward. This is going to have a bit more of a rushed feel. So pulling the backbeat is a great way of adding a bit of groove, but also making it feel a bit more relaxed as well. So you just need to set it back a little bit. Doesn't need to be much. Remember, pulling and pushing your backbeat is completely optional. Having your kick, your clap, and your open hi-hat on the grid is still perfectly fine. This is just another option if you want to add a bit of groove with your clap. I've maintained the same note length and timing for the kick because we want to have that consistent pulse throughout the track. We've also varied the note length for our rim shots here, as well as the placement. So we can see here that this has been shifted off the grid, whereas it's meant to hit here, it's actually hitting here. So as you've probably thought by now, this is exactly the same thing as adding a swing or a groove to your track. I've just opted to do this manually, but if you want to do this the easier way, you just go over here to groove, and then you select a groove of your choice, and you just press it, and you don't need to commit the groove because just selecting your chosen groove will be enough to apply the groove to the clip. A key point when it comes to the groove of your track is you want to have a consistent groove across all the elements in your track. If I'm using an MPC 3000 on my drums here, I want to have that same groove applied to my bass and my synths. That way everything is going to be locked into the same groove. Whereas if I'm using 57 on my drums and 71 on my bass or my synths, that means my bass and my synths are going to be swung a lot more than my drums. And it's not going to have that cohesive feel throughout the track. So try to avoid having different grooves throughout the track and pick one and apply everything to that one. Just to give you another demo of what that sounds like. Point number 3 is going to be something called conversation. The basic idea behind conversation is call and response. You have to remember that a real drummer is constantly reacting as well as adding emphasis to the end of the phrase. So just to show you some call and response as well as some fills here, I'm going to dive into this clip here. So you've probably heard there, I have added an open hi-hat. This one's a bit more sustained. And the point of that is I'm trying to add a bit of a call and response with our regular open hi-hat. So if I play the two together, as well as show you. So I've added another note here. And I've added the extra open hi-hat here. Let's just solo that. So it feels a bit more call and responsey. Like the original open hi-hat is creating the call, whereas the sustained open hi-hat is creating the response. I've also done it to the kick here. Originally it was just a standard kick pattern, but I've decided to add another note here. And finally, I've also added a variation here with our snare. So originally it was just this note and this note playing, but I've decided to add a fill as well as a bit of a response here. And altogether, that's what this is going to sound like. One important point to add, you want to give your elements some space when you're doing this. So since we've added some extra notes, as well as an extra hi-hat here, you want to allow for space amongst your drums. So having removed some of the closed hi-hats here, we've allowed for room for an additional hi-hat, as well as the extra snare, and we've removed the kick here at the end to make some room for the snare fill here. So since we're constantly adding things into our drums, it's really easy for this to get overcrowded, which is why you want to add and remove things intentionally. And if it starts to sound a little bit crowded and it's not really making any sense, that's normally a really good sign to start removing things out of the drums. So just to sum everything up, so we can see here that we have variations in our note lengths. as well as the timing of our notes. We have a lot of variations in our velocity, and we also have our conversation and our fills. So we're ending with a fill using our snares, and we're also creating some type of call and response with our other elements, like we did with our hat and our sustained open hi-hat, and even our kick drum. So just to show you one more time what our drums sound like before we apply all of these techniques. Versus what they sound like after. So with just 3 tweaks there, which is accent, placement, and conversation, we've taken our boring drum loop into something that's actually interesting and hypnotic. Drum sounds that we used in this video are actually part of our House Essentials sample pack. And if you're interested in getting a copy, the link will be in the description below, including the link to our production membership. I'd love to hear in the comments below which of these 3 things were missing from your drums. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.